I'm Randy Reed, editor of the Edison Report, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Rea of the Lighting Research Center, a living legend, and our 2017 Person of the Year. Mark, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Randy.
Really appreciate you inviting me up. Mark, tell us a little bit about what you were doing before you got involved with the LRC.
Well, I was at the National Research Council of Canada, the National Labs for Canada, doing research related to energy efficiency in buildings. That was my primary charge.
And how did you get the idea for the LRC?
Well, I didn't have the idea. It was actually Russ Leslie and Walter Kroner, who were professors here at RPI, that responded to a request for proposal by the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. So they just hired me.
So Mark, tell our audience what you were doing in 1988 when you first got involved with the LRC.
Well, we didn't have more than 4 or 5 people at the time, and we were on campus. It was a time when I guess I always like to say I really had no idea what I was doing. So there was a lot of trial and error, but I had a lot of good support from industry and government stakeholders who were part of a director's council that sort of got me mature quickly in those early years, in 88 through 92 is thereabouts. And so Fred Heller at Genlight, Jack White from NYSERDA, there were a lot of really important people, leaders, that helped me be marginally competent in those early years.
NYSERDA was first in 88, is that right?
They were the ones that funded the Lighting Research Center to get started, yes.
Okay, and then you had Genlight, and then I believe GE?
That's correct.
Okay.
And then we've had Philips and Osram, and a variety of sponsors, both national and international, have worked with the LRC over the years.
Mark, I think one of your first projects at the LRC was the National Lighting Product Information Program. Tell our audience a little bit about that.
Well, I would say that's probably among the top 2 or 3 things I'm proudest about at the Lighting Research Center. You may recall the history that there was always 2 or 3 electronic ballast manufacturers, but next year it'd be 2 or 3 different ones, right? In those early years. Yeah. And there was no really independent testing, and right. So we were able to put together, not from industry funding, but from government and utilities, put together a program where we could test the performance of lighting products and then publish them by name. And I think it made a huge difference to the industry. We got a lot of pushback from the industry to start with. Who are you to tell us what we're doing? But that independent third party actually began to differentiate the quality products from the junk. And it turned out the industry eventually began to realize that National Lighting Product Information Program was a big benefit to everybody.
Now, in 1993, the LRC was commissioned to edit the 8th edition of the Handbook. So it was written by volunteers, but you guys edited it. Tell us a little bit about that process.
Well, it was a radical change. Bill Hanley was the executive director of the IES at that time, and you know him. You worked with him when you were president. It took a bold move because the tradition had been it was always an in-house publication. And so Bill and I talked, and we said we would do it for a price. I guess it turned out to be about 35 cents an hour on what it but it was a major undertaking because there was a lot of stuff that hadn't changed in 30 years. There was individual committees that had their own view and reality, and being able to kind of rationalize that and look like a comprehensive book was a big challenge. We had the whole center really tied up in knots that year.
In 2001, the LRC first established the LED Lighting Institute for lighting professionals. What did you see in 2001 that took me a decade to see?
Well, actually, I don't really deserve the credit for that. It was Dr. Narendran's vision that really saw the need for this. Again, the top 2 or 3 things I'm proudest of, I think, is the work of being able to lay out with consensus process with the industry how is it that you can measure the performance of an LED system. You remember the days when they were going to last 100,000 hours and so on. Well, of course, it boils down to how the system's put together and whether that works or not. So we can do that in the laboratory, and we did develop, I think, the test methods for LM70 and so on. But it's not enough just to publish things. It turned out that you really had to bring people in to learn about it in a hands-on way. And so we've been putting on 2 LED institutes, I think, every year since 2001, where we have enough, and of course the technology changes, the questions change and so on, but that relationship between the industry standards and then bringing practitioners together to understand what does it all mean and how it works, I think has been a major transformation in getting LEDs in place in the marketplace today.
But in 2001, there wasn't even discussion about general lighting for LED that I'm aware of. Is that right?
We have a great crystal ball here.
Well, you must. I mean, you really, really must. In 2004, I attended the Bridges and Light Symposium here with Bill McDonough and Govey Rao, and I was fascinating. You had Bill McDonough, you had 20 CEOs sitting in the audience, and you had Bill McDonough asking them, why do you put mercury in your lamps? Why do you poison our water? Why do you kill people? And there was a lot of tension in that room. I mean, these guys were getting up, they were walking around, they were walking out. It was fascinating. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, as you mentioned, Govey Rao, he deserves a lot of credit. We partners with Philips Lighting. He was with Philips Lighting at the time. And Govey and I got to be close friends, really, in that relationship and so on. And we were arguing together, not apart, that there was a transformation about to occur in the industry, the disruptive technology of solid-state lighting, but also the area of light and health, which in 2004 was also kind of on the fringe and not very interesting. But both of those things became major themes of that conference, of which we put forward, and I think introduced the lighting industry to a different way to think about what their whole role was in society. And I think this issue, not only solid-state lighting, which is obvious, but probably the hottest topic right now is light and health. All those things were really laid out in front of the industry, leaders like yourself, in that early stage. And I think it really was a watershed. I still talk to people who think that was really a watershed conference.
It was eye-opening for me. So during this time, I was president of the Illuminating Engineering Society, and you'd done a lot of work for IES prior, but you didn't really have a good feeling about the IES during that time. Is that fair to say?
Well, if you know anything about the Lighting Research Center, and I know you do, we've been change agents. You look at the kinds of work we do, and we mentioned solid-state lighting and forecasting what has happened, light and health. You know, Mariana Figueroa's just done a tremendous job, I think, of bringing the industry with it. I guess that building on the success we had with 2 handbooks and so on, we wanted to keep that momentum going with the IES. But my impression, and I hope I'm not being unfair, is just they were so stuck in the old ways. And so what I wanted to do was to actually elevate the quality of the journal and be able to really have something that we're proud of. We look at things like impact factor for journals. And I don't even know if the current journal for the IS is even on the radar. Nobody really cites it. Nobody really cares, if you will, about the papers that are in there. But lighting is such an impactful topic. I mean, all of the things that really light touches, whether it's safety on the road or comfort and quality and light and health and all those things, it's a real pity that I'm sorry to say, the IS is sometimes so far behind the times. It's
but even today you feel that way.
Well, there's a new management. Perhaps I think the jury's still out, but I think everyone, including myself, is optimistic that things will be more modern, I guess, at the IS.
Sure. And I've seen some improvements and more modern, and you've probably seen some.
Yeah, sure, definitely. Tom Butters, for example, I think is a spectacular guy. He's just he's the vice president of education.
Right.
And I think he's really caring and thoughtful, and I can say nothing but good things about Tom Butters.
In 2011, the LRC invented one of the top 10 products of the year.
Scimitar.
Scimitar. I have trouble with that. Tell us a little bit about that invention and that research that went into that.
Well, in Europe they call it the daisy meter, because if you look at it phonetically, you could go either way, but it's intended to be the Scimitar. That was a project actually first funded by Department of Energy to look at personal exposure to daylight in offices. We had always envisioned it as some way of measuring circadian effective light. But Department of Energy said they weren't funding any health-related things, so we developed this technology that really quantified personal light exposures, because most light meters, is a handheld thing you put on the desk. This was something that goes around with you and records your photon exposure 24/7. Obviously, when you're asleep, you can put it beside the bed. But being able to then track in a calibrated way what your light exposure is over those repeated 24-hour periods allowed us to get some insight into things like circadian disruption, and it became compact, measurable, calibrated. I mean, we pride ourselves in our ability to measure light and electricity here, and it's a first-rate instrument, and I think it's still...
Well, it's really opened the door to so much more research.
I think so. I definitely think so. But measurement doesn't mean much if you can't interpret the data, and that's been a large part of what we do too. So it's not the point of what we're trying to do, but we do know that measuring these photons throughout the day is the only way you're going to really understand how circadian system entrains to Troy, New York, or wherever you happen to be.
So you guys have been very heavy in the light and health. What is one of the things that you've learned that surprised you?
Well, there are many, but I would say the most profound has been that our lighting practices over the years to save energy have really impaired people's ability to entrain to that light-dark cycle. We're finding, I'm surprised at how robust it is. If we can get the light level up at the eye, work we've done in Reykjavik and in Latvia, and Washington, D.C., we're finding that if we can get the light levels up during the day and then dim at night, people sleep better, they fall asleep sooner when they go to bed. And all these things are not one-off studies. There's a whole body of literature from the basic science all the way that we've been doing, looking at the applications. And that same story is consistent all the way across. So these people that say, well, do no harm, I think it's born of their ignorance. They really don't understand. But if you have your foot in the basic science, you get out into the field as we do, and we see the implications for real people, my statement is don't be negligent. This is something that is a really powerful tool that lighting industry, in my judgment, has to begin to embrace, develop the metrics to do that. And I think we're a lot closer than we've ever been to really seeing, not only is it a visual value proposition for lighting, but you also have this circadian regulation that I think is so impactful. We've done it in submarines, and we've done it with Alzheimer's patients, and the same answer just keeps coming up over and over and over again.
So tell us a little bit about the submarines. I find that fascinating because of the day that they're on.
Well, the Navy had been doing 18-hour days.
Right.
And some bright person back in the 60s, when they first developed the nuclear submarine, did a calculation, and they figured that if they had 3 shifts and they were working 18 hours, they had more time where they could be asleep and rested. But it was done without any sense of the biology. We are a 24-hour species, so what happens is you're always jet-lagged on a submarine. And so slowly, and obviously in collaboration with the people we've worked with at Groton as the submarine base there, we got the Admiral to think about a 24-hour schedule, and then we put lighting in that reinforced that strong daytime, dim nighttime circadian regulation. And again, you see, first of all, what you see is everybody, it's in the watch, that shift, they all come together in terms of their circadian time. Before they were everywhere on the clock, so some people were tired, some people were awake, and so on. You just never really knew. So they, first of all came together on the 3 shifts. But then if you measure biologically, are they producing melatonin while they sleep? Yes, they are for the first time. They had less sleepiness. Performance was improved.
You mentioned a few terms, so circadian stimulus and do no harm. Do you worry about the industry marketing products to stimulate circadian to try to get more productivity. So maybe at the end of the day, we're going to tune our lights a little bit to try to squeeze every last bit of productivity out of the workers, and then they won't be able to sleep at night?
Well, that's a long question. So let me try to parse it out
Please.
If I contrast it to what we're doing now, I'm confident to say that our current lighting practices are deleterious to sleep and well-being of people.
Okay.
I also think, based on the theory, not just on humans, but anything to single-cell bacteria, all is looking for bright light during the day, dim light during the night. And as lighting professionals, why aren't we providing that? And so the question now is, what is bright? What is dim? And that's the whole idea of the dosimeter, the basic science we've done. We now can specify precisely what you need to get to maintain that robust, bright day, dim night conditions. So we have the science and we have the technology to do it. Not doing it, in my opinion, is negligence. And so how do we get the technologies that meet the legitimate goals of energy efficiency? I'm not saying throw that out the window, but there are clever ways to change the distribution of light, like we're doing for the U.S. State Department and the General Services Administration, so that we're not using any more energy at all. We're just having different types of fixtures in these workplaces to get you the circadian stimulus you need during the daytime. So you don't. It's a false dichotomy to say, well, I can either have bright, healthy light during the daytime or I can have energy efficiency. If we're as smart as we think we are, we should be, as professionals, be able to put that together for an optimum solution.
You've mentioned disputes. Do you have an opinion on the current dispute between NEMA and the California Energy Commission?
Well, good intentions can lead to trouble. I think California is excited about all the impact they've had, and I think they have on energy efficiency. Obviously, you don't want to have a light source that's efficient but doesn't provide good color, and that's a legitimate concern. Somehow I think because they don't really understand the technical part, they just got hoodwinked into thinking that a color rendering index of 90 somehow meant something. It doesn't. I mean, it's anybody who's done work in this area knows that that's just wrong. I mean, you can't make excuses for it, but people, they seize on something and they won't let it go. I don't actually know what NEMA's position is on that, but I think the work that we've done and others about a two-metric system is predictive of color rendering and gives you a lot of latitude to have high energy efficiency and still have good quality. But concentrating on a CRI 90 is just wrong.
Speaking of color, what's your opinion of TM30?
Well, it's interesting. I was initially very pleased with it because basically they took the ideas that we developed and developed them further. They certainly have beautiful graphics. I mean, I think the graphics are fantastic. I think on a small point, technical point, I don't agree that their saturation metric is appropriate. But, we're looking at third-order effects. I think it's fine, and it's so pretty.
Okay.
It's just a really pretty presentation, I think.
I've seen it, and it is. It's
pretty.
Very compelling. Okay. Pretty. TM30. You think it will take off?
I think it should. It's not ideal, but it's such a big step forward that I think it's worth embracing, and it's pretty.
Okay, it's pretty. You've taken a year sabbatical. What did you do during that time? What did you learn?
Well, there were two things. One was I had anticipated stepping down as director, and it was a nice way to sort of transition through that. So Mariana Figueroa was appointed the acting director, and then she was appointed permanently last July, which is a great thing. And so it was a way for me to, first of all, get a sense of where the industry was. You and I talked earlier that it's an industry in transition. The old way of doing business has changed. So a lot of people think solid-state lighting was a disruptive technology because it's more efficacious and longer life. But really what happened was the business models changed. No longer were you captured by high capital investments of fluorescent tubes and producing them for pennies. You now had somebody in a garage that could actually start a company and actually sell product. So that was completely disruptive. And my ability to go around this country and in Europe, being able to ask questions about where the industry was going, what they saw. And it's interesting, there's sort of a bifurcation of views. There are those that feel that lighting now has become just an infrastructure for data, that really, gosh, we have all this infrastructure, let's use it. Lighting doesn't matter that much. And then there are the people that still feel that lighting has a value, whether it's for visibility and comfort, but also health-related issues. Whether that comes back together again down the road, I'm not altogether sure, but you know better than I would that the industry is still trying to figure out what does it mean to be in the lighting industry right now. So that was number one. Number two was developing our new plant health, lighting and plant health program here. Back in 1999, when we became, my last sabbatical was to help get the light and health program started. I think that turned out well. So now the question is, what does the Lighting Research Center going to contribute on this idea of plant health? And it's really a lot of fun. I mean, it's all new. I see, again, we talk about lighting and the journal back in the early 2000s. I mean, here's something that really has science to application to bear. There's a lot of very interesting science going on, and now converting that into the applications, I think it's going to be another 15, 20 years of really interesting work.
You've listed several projects that you're proud of. Do you have any others that you want to mention that you're really proud of?
Well, I think that not necessarily they're different, but I think there's some that sort of personal, but there's also the ones that are on behalf of the center. Clearly one of the, I think the real major milestones that I feel best about is our educational program here, which was started in 1990, and we had a wide range of industry people came together to help us shape that program. And it was really the first graduate program in lighting. I mean, we aspire to make lighting a field, like psychology or chemistry, you know what I mean? And I think it has the intellectual richness that it can do that. And because it was a graduate program, we could marry it with the research much easier than just an undergraduate program. So we see others in the world now that have done graduate programs, and so I feel best about that. I think in particular, our graduates are impactful people. I think they got a good education when they were here, and I think that's certainly one of the major milestones. I get a lot of satisfaction out of that. I think that my background's in sensory biophysics, and what does that mean? It's basically wiring diagrams for the retina, so how do you convert photons into electrical signals to the brain? And so some of the work I've done with my colleagues, like mesopic vision, for example, we pioneered that. We mentioned color rendering. We pioneered that two-metric system, circadian phototransduction that we've done. How does it look for the circadian system? All of those really sort of biophysical studies that we've done, I think, have been really personally rewarding to me. But National Lighting Product Information Program, graduate program, the handbooks, all of those, the Boeing project, all of those things, I think, is a institution we feel very proud of collectively.
So you're still a relatively young man. What does your future hold? What are you going to do?
You mean between now and the grave?
You can define it however you want to define it.
Well, right now, two areas have my attention. One is the plant health, which I mentioned, and so that's coming along very well. We hired a plant pathologist, Dr. Jayman Patel, and we're doing legitimate plant pathology here now. The other is more traditional, and I'm working with John Bullough primarily on the outdoor lighting transportation field. I think that at night you got to have lighting. I mean, you can't really not function without the lights. And I'd say, perhaps unkindly, the state of the art is the 1940s or 50s in outdoor lighting. I mean, it's remarkable to me how interesting and impactful lighting can be on safety and a sense of safety. So I think the real opportunity, although it's been around a long time, is going to be in outdoor lighting. And now with self-driving vehicles and advanced headlight systems, the technology is there to actually do some really innovative things on outdoor lighting that demonstrably improve safety for people driving.
1,800 projects, 175 in-house publications, 1,130 peer-reviewed papers, and $130 million in projects.
Not all mine.
But you led the effort. It's the LRC. These are the LRC numbers, which you have led the effort. So congratulations on your career and what you've done for the industry for all of us.
Well, thank you, Randy. I have to say the Edison Report is one of those things that everybody looks to every day practically to see what's new. So I'm extremely flattered that you've asked me to do this.
You don't need to be flattered because you've earned it. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Really appreciate the time today.
Thank you, Randy.